You ready?
Yeah, all good. Yeah.
Right. Simon, it's great to be back with you. I just checked, it's been a year and a half since we first spoke. At the time, you were the managing director of Decent, and you've now, which is digital agency, you've now moved beyond Decent to the broader family of companies that Decent is part of. And it sounds like you've got a really interesting role as a change maker there. I'd love to hear just a little bit about what you're doing now and what who or what is part of the family that you're working in.
Sure. Well, yes, it's a really. I work for the Panoply, a UK-based technology and design business with about nearly 700 people working for the group across the UK, Norway, and Bulgaria. And as chief operating officer, it's a really interesting remit because the Panoply's grown very rapidly from being 3 people less than 3 years ago to being that number now. And we've done that through acquisition and organic growth, and we continue to grow rapidly. One of the really interesting things about my role is just understanding how all the different companies in the Panoply work together and understanding how we can take the opportunities that being part of a group and working more closely together can give us. And that starts to take us into understanding different organizational cultures, different organizational models, and actually how we can orient ourselves around our clients and the work we do for our clients more effectively.
When we spoke, when you were at Decent at the time, and you were very progressive in the things that you were doing. A lot of the things that we talk about and lead together, you were already doing. We quote you in a lot of different chapters in the book for that reason, because you had embraced so many different things. I'm curious from that journey and now as you're going into a broader ecosystem, some of the things that you're learning. And I'd love to dive into decision making because I find that is a topic that is it's the largest chapter in the book for good reason, because it's there's lots of elements to it and people are often very curious about it. So what have you learned along the journey about decision making, effective decision making, where decision making can maybe go off the rails at times?
I think the first, it's a really interesting one because I've learnt as I've worked with a larger group of people across our company, is the first one really is understanding who your stakeholders are, if you can call them that, and in a decision. And we talk about decision-making models and decision-making tools, but actually even before you get to that point, understanding who the interested parties are in a decision is really important. It sometimes might sound obvious, but often it's the hidden decision makers or the people that have maybe an interest in a decision or the implications of that decision that maybe aren't immediately in front of you. They may be working in a different part of the organization or in part of organization that's affected in a secondary way by the decision. And sometimes those are the people that get missed, even when you have a fairly clear decision-making process.
And what has been the decision-making process that you've embraced as an organization? Do you have one? Does everybody kind of do their own thing?
So it's interesting. We are just getting to the point of consciously agreeing processes for making decisions. So to date, as a group that's come together very rapidly, we haven't had teams that have managed to form sort of high trust teams across organisations that have managed to form to come to get to taking decisions consciously amongst themselves. We're now getting to that point. So we're now at the point where we're starting to talk about, okay, well, what is a decision? How do decisions work in an organization where we're seeking to push accountability and decision making as close to our client facing teams as possible? And we're just starting to explore that now. But certainly as we go into taking some of the big decisions, we're taking a far more consultative approach, but we're also being very clear about who is entitled to take which types of decisions and finding a way of making that very visible to people in the organization. And I think once you've done the hard work on that kind of thinking and you've got people on board with the process, it's really interesting how quickly things can move. And actually it's about unlocking pace through getting decision making pushed as close to client teams as possible.
Nice. If you reflect back to your Decent days, when I think you were a little bit, you had advanced more into decision making, I would say, is one of the things that I hear from the folks that I talk to that are in systems trying to really establish some healthy decision making paradigms is they can very quickly devolve, I'm not sure if that's the right word, back to consensus. And so how have you found consensus fits in a healthy way, in an unhealthy way, in the systems you're in?
I think we've worked a lot with principles. And so we think we've worked about how do we define principles for different aspects of what we want to do. So for example, we're just working on setting up a very major change program. And we spent time with our senior leaders talking about what are the principles for change. So as we roll out this change program and actually devolve autonomy in the change program to lots of people who can take lots of decisions, what do we want them to hold themselves to and to be accountable for in terms of the principles? So we have principles that talk about we don't want to reinvent things that already happen in one place in the organization. We want to extend it. So things like that. Agree them as principles, and that is about consensus, because ultimately that's the point at which we can bind people in, saying this is our shared vision for the context in which we want decisions made. And then it's about visibility of those decisions across the program, so that we can say, actually, yeah, can we tick all 6 boxes against those principles? And if we can, then we're comfortable and we don't need to get involved. And it's like a muscle, really. The more people do that, the more they get comfortable understanding how to assess decisions against principles. And okay, so what we did is we agreed with our senior leaders a set of principles for decision making in our change program. And what that now allows us to do is help people understand the context in which they're taking decisions and some of the strategic drivers that we're looking for as an organization in those decisions, but it also gives them the space to actually interpret those for the situation they're faced with, the evidence they've gathered before they have to make a decision. And it gives them confidence that they can stand behind that decision, and they're not going to be having someone looking over their shoulder and saying, well, I don't understand why you did that. If they can genuinely say, this is hitting all the principles. And if it's not hitting the principles, then maybe that's where they need the support of someone else from somewhere else in the program, a senior leader as a coach or something like that, to help them understand if there's a different way, or help just maybe look at it through a different lens.
Remember when we spoke before, you just mentioned coaches, that was a key element of how you work as a team. And I'm thinking now about decision making, and the organization that you're now part of, I think is you said something like 700 people.
Around that, yeah.
So how do you introduce something like a decision-making framework approach, a set of principles across a group that's that large? And I'm sure this is still something you're figuring out as you go. Yeah. But what have you learned so far?
If I think about the program we're just setting up at the moment and just establishing, our plan really is to role model some of that in the big early decisions we make. So actually very visibly stepping people through the decision-making approach that we want to take, and using that for some of the early decisions in the program, and almost using them as kind of mini case studies. So saying, here's how we decided to do X. Here's the steps we went through. It fits the model because of this. And this is the kind of way that we want to make decisions in the future. And then starting to roll that out to people that are maybe immediately adjacent to the center of the program. And then gradually, as it becomes a thing that we do more regularly, we can start saying, actually, yeah, that's just a normalized behavior, rather than that's something we're doing that's different.
I find that so much of this healthy decision-making, the different mechanisms we put in place, the different tools, the different mindsets, when people learn them, they'll often say, well, that's just common sense. But it really is taking and making the implicit explicit. So for those that already naturally work that way, it may not be that much of a shift. For some, it might be new learning, and just really helping to take it and make it explicit to show people what's happening.
It's implicit to explicit, and it's also hidden to visible. And because a lot of people will go through the decision-making process in their head, which is great for them, but actually doesn't allow others to learn, and doesn't give that transparency so people know what's going on. So there's that visibility is really important as well.